The silence that followed the final wet tear of flesh was more terrible than any scream. It hung in the cold night air, thick with the scent of pine and fresh blood. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, turning the ceremonial stones a ghostly white, and the spreading pool beneath Ronan's body a slick obsidian black. My claws, still extended, dripped with the life I had just taken. The life of my mate, the ghost of our bond, a thing of fire and fury he had tried to brand onto my soul, shuddered and then went utterly, terrifyingly quiet. It was like losing a limb I had never wanted, the phantom ache a hollow testament to the cruelty of fate. I remained on my knees, my breath a ragged cloud in the chill. My wolf, the beast that had risen in a tide of final, desperate rage, receded, leaving me cold and human and trembling. I stared at my hands, caked in gore, the same hands Ronan had tried to bind in silver chains just an hour before, whispering promises of breaking me into the obedient mate I was born to be. He had been wrong. A single gasp broke the spell. It came from Elder Alara, her face a mask of horror. Then, like a dam breaking, the clearing erupted. A wave of sound crashed over me, growls that were not just anger, but a deep, primal revulsion. Howls of grief and fury tore through the night, echoing off the ancient pines that ringed our sacred ground. The pack surged forward, a living wall of bared teeth and golden eyes burning with righteous hatred. "Murderer!" The word was a venomous spit from Ronan's brother Kael, his face contorted in a snarl. "She broke the bond, an abomination," another voice shrieked. "Tear her apart, let the moon drink her blood." They pressed in, the air growing hot with their rage, their collective scent a suffocating mix of sweat and fury. I did not flinch. I did not cower. I had run for 3 years from this fate, from the male who saw me as nothing more than a vessel for his heirs, a prize to be tamed. The running was over. I lifted my chin, meeting their hatred with the weary emptiness that had settled in my bones. Let them come. Death was a kinder master than Ronan would have ever been. "Enough!" The voice of Elder Theron, the pack's highest authority, cracked like a whip through the chaos. The wolves flinched back, but the growls continued, a low rumbling earthquake of promised violence. He stood before the council of 3, his face ashen, his gaze fixed on the corpse at my feet. "Lysandra Kelwyn, you have spilled the blood of your bonded mate on sacred ground. You have broken the most sacrosanct law of our people. There is only one verdict for such a crime." He didn't need to say the word. It hung in the air between us. Death. A slow, agonizing death. As was custom for those who defied the fates, my heart, which had been a frantic drum against my ribs, slowed to a dull, heavy thud. So this was it. The end of a life that had felt like it ended years ago, when the fates had cursed me with a mate like Ronan. I closed my eyes, picturing not the snapping jaws of my pack, but the open sky, the freedom I had tasted for a few fleeting years while on the run. It was a sweeter memory than anything this life had ever offered me, but the final sentence never came. A change rippled through the clearing, a sudden, inexplicable shift in the very atmosphere. The angry growls died in the wolves' throats, replaced by uneasy whimpers. The scent of pine and blood was suddenly overwhelmed by something else, something ancient and powerful, like ozone after a lightning strike, and the cold, clean scent of a winter mountain peak. The air grew heavy, charged with a pressure that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Even the moonlight seemed to bow, the shadows deepening at the edge of the woods. The pack parted, not by command, but by instinct. They flattened themselves, heads lowered, a wave of submission washing over them as a figure emerged from the darkness. He was a myth made flesh. King Theron Veyrath, the Alpha of Alphas, the ruler of all 7 territories. Whispers said he was as old as the mountains, that his soul was forged from the heart of a fallen star. They said he had wrestled shadows and won. Looking at him now, I believed it. He was larger than any wolf I had ever seen, his presence so immense it seemed to suck the very air from the clearing. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his size, his black leather tunic and trousers, doing nothing to hide the raw, coiled power in his frame. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down across his jaw, a pale white line against his sun-darkened skin that only made his face more brutally handsome. But it was his eyes that held the world captive. They were not gold, like the rest of us, but a startling glacial silver, and they burned with an intensity that felt like it could see right through flesh and bone to the trembling soul within. He did not look at the elders. He did not look at the snarling pack. His gaze landed on me, and for the first time since my wolf had struck, a tremor of true fear, cold and sharp, pierced my numbness. It felt like being pinned by the weight of a mountain. King Theron stopped just feet away, his shadow falling over me. He looked from my blood-soaked hands to the lifeless form of Ronan, and then his silver eyes met mine again. There was no judgment in them, no anger. There was something else, something I couldn't name. A dark, knowing curiosity, an ancient recognition that terrified me more than any threat. Elder Orin, shaking, found his voice. "My king," he stammered, bowing his head so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. We did not expect your presence. This is a pack matter, an Omega who has committed the ultimate sin." The king's gaze did not leave my face. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the stone beneath my knees. It was a voice accustomed to absolute command, a voice that could calm storms or start wars. "I was passing through the valley. I felt the bond shatter," he said simply, as if he could feel the breaking of every bond in his entire kingdom. "I came to see the cause." "The cause is a monster, your majesty," Kyle shouted, emboldened by grief. "She is cursed. She fled her claiming, and when her mate rightfully brought her back to honor her duty, she murdered him." The king's head turned slowly, and the sheer force of his attention made Cale stumble back, his bravado vanishing like smoke. "She was your brother's fated," the king stated, a subtle chill in his tone. "Yes, and she tore his throat out like a rabid animal." King Theron's silver eyes returned to me. He took another step closer, crouching down, so he was nearly at my level. The pack held its breath. I could smell the storm on his skin, feel the feral power of his wolf prowling just beneath the surface. It was a power so vast, so overwhelming, that my own wolf, the one who had just killed an alpha male, whimpered and tried to hide in the deepest corners of my soul. "Look at me," he commanded softly. I had no choice. My head lifted, my eyes locking with his. He studied my face, his gaze tracing the lines of exhaustion and defiance. He saw the filth, the blood, the wildness in my eyes, and he did not look away. He saw it all. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice for me alone. "Why did you run from your fate?" The question stunned me. No one had ever asked why. They only saw the crime, the audacity of it, the quiet intensity in his eyes, cracked open a fissure in my defenses. A single hot tear escaped and traced a clean path through the grime on my cheek. "Because my fate," I whispered, my voice raw and broken, "was a cage." A flicker of something, understanding perhaps, passed through his glacial eyes. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching the silver manacle still locked around my wrist, the one Ronan had snapped on me when he dragged me back. With a flex of his fingers, a faint crack echoed in the silence, and the silver fell away. Broken, he stood, turning to face the stunned elders and the furious pack. He towered over them all, a king in every sense of the word. "She is an Omega," Elder Theron insisted, his voice trembling with the effort to challenge the king. "Unstable. Her wolf is unnatural. She must be put down before her curse spreads." King Theron Veyrath let the silence stretch, his gaze sweeping over the sea of wolves. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer a murmur, but a declaration that rang with the force of iron law. "This is no crime," he said, his words echoing the very ones from my nightmares and my hopes. "This is destiny." A wave of shocked muttering swept through the pack. Kyle stared, his mouth agape. The elders looked at each other in bewildered disbelief. "Destiny? How could the brutal murder of a fated mate be destiny? The king's gaze fell upon me once more, and this time the look in his eyes was possessive, a claim as tangible as a brand. He was not just absolving me, he was taking me. The old prophecies speak of a wolf born of a broken bond, a harbinger of change, whose hands would be stained with the blood of a false fate to clear the path for a true one, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the clearing. You see a murderer, I see the fulfillment of a prophecy you were all too blind to read. He turned to the two hulking guards who had materialized silently behind him, their armor black as night, their faces grim and unreadable. They were his Lycaean guard, shadows of the king's will. Take her to the Black Spire, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. She is under my protection now. The Black Spire, the king's personal fortress, a place of legend and fear, where no one went unless summoned, and from which few returned unchanged. The words "under my protection" sounded less like a promise of safety and more like a sentence. The pack stared, silent and afraid, their thirst for my blood instantly extinguished by a deeper, more primal fear of their king. One of the guards moved toward me. I flinched, but his touch was impersonal as he helped me to my feet. I stumbled, my legs weak. As they led me away from the clearing, away from the body of the male I had killed and the pack that loathed me, I risked one last look back. The king had not moved. He stood like a monolith in the moonlight, his silver eyes locked on me, watching me go, and in their depths I saw not a savior, but a sovereign predator who had just claimed the most dangerous, broken thing in the forest for his own. He hadn't saved my life, he had merely taken ownership of it. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the cage I had just escaped was nothing compared to the one I was being led into now. The journey to the Black Spire was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The two Lycaean guards flanked me, their movements synchronized and silent, their presence as unyielding as the granite mountains around us. They didn't speak to me, didn't look at me. I was not a person to them. I was cargo, a package to be delivered. My bare feet, numb with cold, stumbled over roots and stones, but their iron grips on my arms never faltered, holding me upright when my body threatened to collapse. The adrenaline of the kill had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion so profound it felt like a sickness. My wolf, the furious, magnificent beast that had saved me, was gone, retreating into a deep, trembling silence within me, leaving me achingly human and vulnerable. With every step, the phantom pain of my broken bond throbbed behind my eyes. It wasn't grief, it was a void, a hollowed-out space in my soul where Ronan's violent, possessive energy had once tried to take root. Now there was only a cold, clean emptiness. It should have felt like freedom, but under the watchful eyes of the king's shadows, it felt more like the stillness of a tomb. Then I saw it. The Black Spire did not rise from the earth so much as stab at the sky. It was a single, monolithic tower of volcanic rock, so dark it seemed to devour the moonlight, leaving only a jagged silhouette against the star-dusted heavens. There were no battlements, no decorative flourishes. It was a fortress built for one purpose: to intimidate, to dominate, to stand as a testament to the untamable power of the wolf who dwelled within. As we drew closer, I could feel a low vibration humming through the soles of my feet, a resonant energy emanating from the very stone of the spire, as if it were alive and breathing. The massive gates, carved from what looked like petrified ironwood, swung open without a sound, revealing a cavernous hall. The air inside was cool and still, carrying the scent I had first encountered in the clearing: ozone, cold stone, and the deep, masculine musk of a predator at the peak of his power. The king's scent. It was everywhere, infused into the very fabric of the place, and it was so potent that my senses reeled. My inner wolf, which had been dormant, stirred uneasily, a low growl of pure instinctual fear rumbling in my chest. This was the den of an apex predator, and I had just been dragged into the heart of it. The hall was vast and starkly beautiful. Polished obsidian floors reflected the flickering light of torches set in iron sconces, their flames casting long, dancing shadows. There were no banners, no trophies of war, only the raw, majestic power of the architecture itself. My guards led me down a long corridor, our footsteps the only sound in the profound silence. They brought me to a heavy oak door and opened it, guiding me inside before one of them spoke for the first time. His voice was as rough as gravel. "Do not try to leave. The king will see you when he is ready." The door closed with a final booming thud, the sound of a lock clicking into place echoing the death of my fleeting hope. I was a prisoner, but this was no dungeon cell. The room was larger than any I had ever slept in, furnished with a stark, masculine luxury. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, its warmth a welcome shock to my frozen skin. A thick black fur rug, soft and decadent, was spread before it. The bed was a huge four-poster, carved from the same dark wood as the door, and piled high with furs and linens. The only window was a tall, arched opening, but it offered no escape. Intricate, sharp-edged patterns of stone formed a screen more beautiful and more impenetrable than any iron bars. A gilded cage. The words echoed in my mind, a bitter confirmation of my deepest fears. On a small wooden chest at the foot of the bed lay a simple, clean tunic of dark gray wool and a pair of soft leather trousers. Beside it was a basin of steaming water, scented with herbs. A silent command. "Clean yourself." My hands were still stained. The blood had dried to a dark, rusty brown under my nails and in the creases of my skin. Ronan's blood. I stared at it, a wave of nausea and dissociation washing over me. Did I do that? Did these hands tear a life from the world? The wolf had acted, but I was the one left with the consequences. Slowly, mechanically, I stripped off my tattered, filthy clothes and began to wash. The water turned a murky pink. As I scrubbed away the grime and the evidence of my crime, my destiny, as the king had called it, I felt like I was trying to scrub away a part of my own soul. When I was clean, I dressed in the clothes provided. They were soft, warm, and fit me as if they had been made for me. The gesture was both a kindness and a chilling reminder of my status. I was a thing to be cared for, a possession to be maintained. I curled up on the fur rug before the fire, pulling my knees to my chest, and waited. The silence of the tower pressed in on me, broken only by the crackle of the flames. I thought of the pack, of their hatred. I thought of Ronan, of his sneering face as he'd snapped the manacle on my wrist, his voice full of cruel satisfaction. "You're mine now, Lysandra. There's nowhere left for you to run." He was right about one thing. There was nowhere left to run. Hours might have passed. I drifted in a state between waking and tormented sleep, my mind replaying the moment of the kill, the snap of sinew, the gush of hot blood. I was startled fully awake not by a sound, but by a change in the air. The fire seemed to flicker and dim. The shadows in the room deepened, and the king's scent, which had been a pervasive background note, sharpened into an overwhelming, immediate presence. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs, and turned. King Theron Veyrath stood in the center of the room, as silent and solid as the stone walls around him. He hadn't entered through the door. He was simply there, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves. He had changed from his leathers into a simple black tunic and trousers, the same as mine. Yet on him, they looked like the robes of a monarch. The firelight played over the sharp planes of his face, accentuating his scar, making his silver eyes gleam with an unnerving light. He said nothing. He simply watched me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. He took in my clean state, the new clothes, my trembling form. My wolf was cowering within me, utterly subdued by the raw dominance radiating from him in palpable waves. This was a power far beyond that of a simple pack alpha. This was primal, ancient, absolute. "You are quiet," he finally said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. He took a slow step toward me. I instinctively took one back. my shoulders hitting the cold stone of the hearth. The beast that defied a council of elders and tore the life from her fated mate. Where is she now? I couldn't find my voice. My throat was tight with fear. He continued to advance, circling me slowly, a predator assessing its new, intriguing prey. They called you a murderer, a curse, an abomination. They have no imagination. His eyes raked over me, and I felt utterly exposed, as if he could see every scar on my soul, every secret I'd ever kept. They see a broken omega. I see a weapon that has never been taught its own strength. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I had to crane my neck to look up at him. I could feel the heat rolling off his body, smell the storm on his skin. "Ronan's bond," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Did it burn you?" The question was so unexpected, so intimate, it stole my breath. I could only nod, a jerky, frightened movement. "He would have tried to break you with it," the king continued, a note of cold certainty in his voice. "To force his will upon your wolf until she submitted or shattered. He was a fool. A bond like yours cannot be commanded. It must be earned." Before I could process his words, his hand came up, impossibly fast. He didn't grab me, didn't threaten. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed against the side of my neck, right over the pulse point where a true mate's claiming mark would be bitten into the skin. A jolt of pure energy, white-hot and blinding, shot through me. It was nothing like the searing, painful pull of Ronan's bond. This was different. It was a deep, resonant hum, a thrum of power that seemed to answer a question my very soul had been asking. My breath hitched. My knees went weak. My wolf, who had been hiding in terror, surged forward with a desperate, yearning whine, recognizing a power that dwarfed her own. A power she instinctively wanted to bow to. The king's silver eyes flared, watching the reaction play out on my face. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but of triumph. "There," he whispered, his thumb stroking the frantically beating pulse in my neck. "That is what they feared. That is the prophecy they forgot." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against my ear, his breath a warm caress that sent a shiver down my entire spine. I was trapped, pinned between his body and the stone wall, drowning in his scent, undone by his touch. "They called your wolf a curse," he murmured, his voice a dark, hypnotic growl. "They were wrong. It is a weapon, and you will learn to wield it for me." He withdrew his hand, and the world rushed back in, cold and sharp. The echo of that blistering connection lingered on my skin, a phantom warmth that made me feel branded. My legs trembled, and I leaned against the stone of the hearth to keep from collapsing. My wolf, which had been so close to the surface, a breath away from answering his primal call, retreated with a frustrated snarl, leaving me hollowed out and shaking. The king watched the storm of emotions on my face, his expression unreadable, his silver eyes missing nothing. The faint, dangerous smile had vanished, replaced by an impassive mask of command. "You are exhausted," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. The breaking of a bond, even a false one, takes its toll on the body and the spirit. Rest. At dawn, your education begins. He turned, and with 2 silent strides, was consumed by the shadows near the door. He didn't use the handle. He simply melted away, leaving me alone in the sudden, crushing silence. I listened for the sound of the lock, but there was none. I was not locked in. The realization was more terrifying than any bolt. He didn't need bars to keep me here. His very presence was a cage, his power an invisible leash wrapped tight around my soul. I stumbled to the massive bed, the furs cool against my feverish skin. Sleep did not come easily. My mind replayed his words on a loop. "A weapon that has never been taught its own strength. You will learn to wield it for me." He spoke of me as if I were a sword to be sharpened, an arrow to be aimed. He was no different from Ronan then. One wanted my body to bear his heirs. The other wanted my wolf to go fight his wars. Both saw me not as Lysandra, but as a tool for their own purposes. And yet, the memory of his touch, of that staggering, resonant power that felt less like a violation and more like a homecoming, betrayed my logic. My fear was at war with a deeper, more treacherous instinct, a yearning for something I had never known I lacked. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were a chaotic tapestry of blood and silver eyes, of running through an endless forest while a shadow with the scent of a winter storm pursued me, not with malice, but with a relentless, possessive patience. I awoke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the stone latticework of the window. A tray of food, smoked fish, black bread, and a wedge of sharp cheese sat on the chest at the foot of my bed, along with a fresh pitcher of water. Beside it lay a new set of clothes, a durable, sleeveless tunic of dark leather and form-fitting trousers that allowed for easy movement, practical for training. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I forced myself to eat, knowing I would need the strength. The silence of the spire was a living thing, a constant pressure that made every small sound. The tearing of bread, the pour of water, seemed deafening. After I dressed, I stood in the center of the room, waiting. I did not have to wait long. The heavy oak door swung inward without a sound. It was not the king, but one of his Ligon guards. He inclined his head once, a silent summons, and I followed him from the room. We walked through winding corridors of polished black stone, the air growing cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and open sky. He led me to a vast enclosed courtyard at the heart of the tower. High, unscalable walls of the same volcanic rock surrounded it, but the top was open to the sky, where the last of the morning stars were fading. The floor was packed earth, scuffed and marked from centuries of use. A few weapon racks stood against one wall, holding dulled practice blades and heavy wooden staves, but otherwise, the space was empty. It felt sacred, like a gladiator's arena, or a place of ritual. King Theron stood in the center, his back to me. He was dressed as I was, in simple training leathers that clung to the hard muscles of his back and shoulders. The rising sun caught the silver streaks in his dark hair. He seemed to be listening to the wind, a figure of absolute stillness and immense coiled power. He turned as I approached, his silver eyes sweeping over me. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a cool, calculating assessment. "Your wolf," he began, his voice devoid of the hypnotic intimacy of the night before, "is a creature of instinct and rage. You have allowed it to cower or to lash out, but you have never commanded it. You treat it as a separate being, a beast trapped within you. You are wrong. It is not your prisoner. You are its sheath. And you are a poor one." His words were like stones, hard and bruising. I flinched, my pride stung. "You cannot call it at will, can you?" he pressed, circling me again, that same predatory grace in his movements. "It comes only in moments of extreme terror or fury. A cornered animal, useless in a battle that requires discipline." "I don't know how," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. The shame of it burned in my cheeks. I was an Omega, yes, but I still had a wolf. To be unable to control it was a mark of profound weakness. "I will teach you," he said simply. He stopped in front of me. "Show me. Try to bring her forward. Let me see the beast that killed Ronan." I closed my eyes, concentrating. I reached inward, searching for that familiar, fiery presence. I found her, but she was huddled in a far corner of my soul, shivering. She sensed the king's power, the overwhelming dominance of the alpha of alphas, and refused to emerge. She would not challenge him. I opened my eyes, defeated. "I can't. She's afraid." A flicker of something, impatience, disappointment, crossed his face. "Fear is a tool, not a master. If you will not command her, I will provoke her." Before I could react, he moved. He was a blur of speed and power. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next his hand was clamped around my throat. It was not a choke. The pressure was firm but controlled, enough to hold me immobile, to demonstrate his complete superiority. My feet left the ground as he lifted me effortlessly, pinning me against the cold stone of the courtyard wall. Panic, stark and blinding, exploded in my chest. My hands flew up to claw at his wrist, but it was like tearing at a mountain. His silver eyes bored into mine, cold and relentless. "Is this what it felt like?" he growled, his voice a low, dangerous vibration against my throat. "When Ronan held you down, when he told you your only purpose was to submit, did you feel this helpless, this weak?" His words were calculated, cruel cuts designed to reopen the wound. Memories flooded me, Ronan's sneering face, the painful grip of his hands, the suffocating weight of his intent. The old terror rose up, thick and choking. But with it came the wang, the same incandescent fury that had saved me in the clearing. A growl ripped from my throat, a sound that was not entirely human. My vision tinged with red at the edges. My fingernails lengthened, hardening into claws that scraped uselessly against the hard leather of his vambrace. My wolf was stirring, woken by the memory of my deepest violation. "There she is," Theron murmured, his eyes glittering with a fierce light. He lessened the pressure on my throat, allowing me a ragged gasp of air, but he did not release me. "Let her out, Lysandra. Let her see me. Let her see that I am not him." With a scream of pure, unadulterated rage, I let her go. The shift was not a full one, not into the four-legged form of my wolf, but a battle shift. Power flooded my limbs, hot and intoxicating. My senses sharpened. I could smell the sweat on his skin, the ancient stone of the wall, the clean morning air. My eyes began to glow with their own faint golden light. I lunged, a beast unbound, aiming to tear out his throat. He was ready. He released me and sidestepped my wild attack with an ease that was insulting. I stumbled, catching my balance on the packed earth, and spun around, snarling, my lips pulled back from my teeth. He stood calmly, his hands relaxed at his sides, watching me. "Wild," he said, his voice laced with a predator's approval. "Magnificent, but unfocused. You strike with anger, not with purpose. Attack me again." I didn't need to be told twice. I threw myself at him, a whirlwind of claws and fury. He met my every move. He didn't strike back. He blocked, parried, redirected. His body moved with a fluid power that seemed impossible for a man of his size. He would catch my wrist in an iron grip, use my own momentum to spin me around, and push me away. Again and again I attacked, and again he neutralized my rage with calm, brutal efficiency. My lungs burned. My muscles screamed. The wild fire of my wolf's rage began to bank, replaced by a frustrating exhaustion. I was a storm crashing against a cliff face, and the cliff was unmoved. Finally, I overextended, lunging with a desperate, sloppy strike. He moved inside my guard, his body pressing against mine, one arm wrapping around my waist to lock me against his chest, the other hand coming up to cup the back of my head, holding me fast. I was trapped, my struggles useless against his strength. I was breathing in his scent, my face pressed against the hard warmth of his shoulder. My wolf, her fury spent, went utterly still within me, suddenly and completely submissive. "Good," he breathed into my ear, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my entire body. We stood like that for a long moment, my heart hammering against his chest, our breaths mingling in the cool air. The raw, primal energy between us was back, thicker and more potent than before, charged with the violence of our struggle. This was a different kind of intimacy, a warrior's embrace that spoke a language deeper than words. He slowly loosened his grip, but he didn't step away. His hands moved to my shoulders, holding me in place as his silver eyes searched my face. "The fire is there," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "But it is wild, uncontrolled. You will learn to focus it. You will learn to make it a tool, not a tempest." He looked up at the Skiniye, a strange somber light in his eyes. "The moontide is coming, Lysandra. It is a convergence of celestial power that happens once every century. It amplifies our abilities, awakens dormant magic, and it thins the veil between worlds. My blood went cold. Veil between worlds? This was the stuff of myth, of pup stories told around a fire. There are enemies who wait for this time, he continued, his gaze dropping back to mine, sharp and serious. Creatures of shadow and hunger who were banished from this world long ago. They hunt for those with unique gifts, wolves like you, whose power they can twist and consume. They are the ones who cursed your bond with Ronan. It was never fate. It was a trap, engineered by them. They hoped the bond would either break your spirit or drive your wolf to such madness that you would destroy yourself and your pack. The world tilted on its axis. My past, my suffering, my crime, it was all reframed in an instant. It wasn't a cruel twist of fate. It was an attack, a deliberate act of war. Theron leaned closer, his voice dropping to a fierce, intense whisper that was for me alone. They don't know that their poison failed. They don't know that in trying to destroy you, they forged you into the only thing that can destroy them. They didn't create a mad beast, Lysandra. His eyes burned into mine, a promise of fire and retribution in their silver depths. They created their own doom. His revelation hung in the air between us, heavier and more chilling than the morning mist. Creatures of shadow, a cursed bond, a trap. The foundations of my life, built on shame and defiance, crumbled into dust. I had not been a victim of fate, but a pawn in a celestial war I never knew existed. The anger I felt toward Ronan, toward my pack, toward the fates themselves, was suddenly eclipsed by a cold, sharp dread. Why? The word was a dry rasp from my throat. Why me? I'm an Omega. My bloodline is nothing special. Theron's hands tightened on my shoulders, his gaze unwavering. Your bloodline is older than you know. The Kaelwyn line was once known for its seers, wolves who could glimpse the threads of destiny, but the shadow creatures, the Umbra, hunted them to near extinction centuries ago. The gift faded, became a whisper, a latent gene waiting for the right catalyst to reawaken it. The moon tide, and the trauma of a corrupted bond. He paused, his expression grim. They chose you because your blood held the ghost of that power. They thought to twist it into a weapon for themselves, to use you as a beacon to open a gateway for their return when the tide is at its peak. My mind reeled. Seer blood. It was impossible. Yet it explained the strange flashes of intuition I'd always had. The unsettling dreams that sometimes came true in small, insignificant ways. I had always dismissed them as quirks, as foolish fancies. Your wolf, he continued, his voice low and intense, is not just a beast of rage. She is a guardian. She rose up to protect you not just from Ronan, but from the dark magic he was tainted with. When you killed him, you did more than break a bond. You severed a tether the Umbra were using to anchor themselves to our world. The blood drained from my face. The weight of what I had done, what it all meant, was crushing. I wasn't just a murderer. I was a key, a weapon, a prophecy, and a target. You said you would teach me, I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength, of purpose. If this was my reality now, I would not face it as a cowering victim. Teach me then. Teach me how to fight them. A flicker of respect, of raw approval, lit his silver eyes. That is the wolf I saw in the clearing, he murmured. The one who chose defiance over death. He released my shoulders and stepped back, the teacher returning to his lesson. Control begins with the senses. Your wolf experiences the world in a way your human mind cannot comprehend. Scent, sound, the very vibrations of the earth. You ignore 90% of what she tells you. Today, you will learn to listen. For the rest of the morning, and for every morning that followed, the courtyard became my world. Theron was a relentless, exacting instructor. He forced me to stand blindfolded in the center of the arena, while his Lycan guards moved silently around the perimeter, teaching me to identify them not by sight, but by the unique scent of their skin, the subtle sound of their breathing, the faint displacement of air as they passed. He threw daggers at a target behind me, forcing me to feel the whistle of the blade through the air and anticipate its impact. He taught me to draw my wolf forward not with rage, but with will. She is not a storm, he would say, his voice a constant grounding rumble. She is the heart of the mountain. Find her stillness, find her strength. It was grueling, frustrating work. More often than not, I failed, collapsing to the packed earth in exhaustion, my muscles aching, my spirit bruised. But Theron never showed pity. He would simply stand over me, a dark, immovable silhouette against the sky. Again, he would command, and I would rise and try again. The afternoons were spent in the spire's ancient library. It was a place of breathtaking wonder, a circular chamber that rose the full height of the tower, its walls lined with shelves crammed with scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the high windows. Here, Theron's demeanor shifted. The harsh taskmaster was replaced by a scholar, his deep voice weaving tales of the first wolves, of the war against the Umbra, and of the prophecies that foretold their return. He showed me star charts, celestial maps that detailed the coming of the moontide. He pointed to ancient texts that spoke of the Kaelwind seers and their unique ability to perceive the shadows that clung to tainted souls. As I read, my own past began to make a terrifying kind of sense. The unease I'd always felt around Ronan, a coldness that went beyond his brutish nature, had not been mere dislike. My wolf had been sensing the Umbra's taint on him. During these long hours, I saw a different side of the king. I saw the weight of the crown he wore, the burden of a secret war he had been fighting alone for years. I saw the loneliness in his eyes when he spoke of the past, of comrades lost to the shadows. He rarely spoke of himself, but in the stories he told, I pieced together a mosaic of a life defined by duty and sacrifice. One evening, as rain lashed against the tower, we sat before the great hearth in the library. I was tracing a faded diagram of umbral runes, my brow furrowed in concentration, when he spoke, his voice quiet. Does your bond mark still ache? I looked up, surprised by the personal question. I touched the place on my shoulder where Ronan's claiming bite would have been. After the bond shattered, it had been a raw, open wound on my soul. Now it was just a faint, silvery scar on my skin and a hollow quiet inside. No, I answered truthfully. It's just empty. A broken bond leaves a void, he said, his silver gaze fixed on the flames. Nature abhors it. It will try to be filled. An unspoken tension thickened the air between us. In our training, there was a constant, intense physical contact. He would guide my stance, his hand firm on my back. He would disarm me, his body pressing mine to the ground. Each touch was a spark, a jolt of that same potent energy I'd felt the first night. My wolf, no longer afraid of him, recognized him as the dominant alpha, the true power. She was drawn to him with an instinct so deep and primal it terrified me. And I, the human part of me, was drawn to the keen intelligence in his eyes, the unexpected patience in his teaching, the glimpses of the lonely man beneath the formidable king. Why did you never take a mate, Your Majesty? I asked, the words leaving my lips before I could stop them. It was an incredibly impertinent question. His gaze shifted from the fire to me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of ancient pain in his eyes, a sorrow so profound it stole my breath. The fates did not grant me one, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. And I would not choose a mate for convenience or politics. A king's bond is a source of immense power. In the wrong hands, it could be a devastating weapon. He was talking about more than just pack alliances. He meant the Umbra. He had kept himself alone, isolated, to protect his kingdom from that very vulnerability. The sheer scale of his sacrifice, of his loneliness, hit me with the force of a physical blow. He stood abruptly, the moment of intimacy broken. That is enough for today. The moontide is only a week away. Your training must intensify. The days that followed were a blur of pain and progress. I learned to summon my battle shift with a thought, to feel the world through my wolf's senses as easily as through my own. I could now identify every guard in the spire by their heartbeat alone. I learned to fight with a staff, the smooth, heavy wood an extension of my own arms. Theron's relentless drills forging muscle and instinct. One evening, he led me to the peak of the spire, a windswept, open platform that offered a breathtaking view of his entire domain. The mountains sprawled below us like sleeping giants, their peaks dusted with the first snow of autumn. The full moon was rising, huge and luminous, its light washing the world in silver. The air was thin and cold, vibrating with a strange humming energy. The moontide was beginning. "The veil is thinning," Theron said, standing beside me, his profile a stark, powerful silhouette against the moon. "They will be testing our defenses, searching for a way in. They will be searching for you." As if his words were a summons, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world wavered, the moonlight seeming to curdle. A whisper slithered into my mind, cold and venomous, a voice made of static and graveyard dirt. "Seer child, we feel you, we smell your power. You belong to us." A gasp escaped my lips and I staggered, clutching my head. The whisper grew louder, promising power, promising revenge against the pack who had scorned me, if only I would open the door for them. "Lysandra, fight it!" Theron's voice cut through the psychic assault. His hands gripped my arms, his strength a grounding anchor in the dizzying chaos. "They are using your own pain against you. Do not listen. See them for what they are." I squeezed my eyes shut, but the vision came anyway. I saw a world of perpetual twilight, of twisted skeletal trees and grasping shadows with hungry red eyes. I saw the Umbra, and their hunger was a tangible thing, a gaping maw that sought to devour all light, all life. "I can't," I whimpered, my body trembling uncontrollably. The cold was seeping into my bones, a supernatural chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "Yes, you can," Theron commanded, his voice a fierce growl. He pulled me around to face him, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that burned away the shadows in my mind. "You are not their puppet. You are the fire that will burn them to ash. Let your wolf see them. Let her feel my strength. We will face them together." He pulled me flush against him, one arm banding around my waist like iron, the other hand tangling in my hair, tilting my head back. His gaze held mine, a silent vow of protection, of alliance. The whispers in my head shrieked, but they were drowned out by the thunderous beat of his heart against my ear, by the overwhelming primal certainty of his power. My fear receded, replaced by the rising fury of my wolf, a righteous anger at these creatures who dared to invade my mind, who had orchestrated my suffering. A low growl rumbled in my chest. The golden light of my wolf's power began to bleed into my vision, pushing back the encroaching darkness. Then Theron lowered his head, and his lips claimed mine. It was not a kiss of romance or of passion. It was a kiss of power, a raw, desperate transfer of strength. It was lightning and thunder, fire and ice. His energy flooded me, a tidal wave of ancient kingly power that merged with my own. The empty void of my broken bond was suddenly violently filled, not with a chain, but with a shield. A new bond, not of fate or of claiming, but of shared purpose and raw will, forged in the moonlight, on the precipice of a war between worlds. When he broke the kiss, we were both breathing heavily, the air crackling around us. The whispers were gone, banished by the sheer force of our combined power. In his silver eyes, I no longer saw a king or a teacher. I saw my alpha, my ally, my anchor. And he, in turn, looked at me with a dawning, terrible realization, as if in saving me, he had just damned himself to a fate far more complicated than the lonely one he had chosen. The echo of the kiss remained, a searing brand on my lips, a roaring fire in my blood. The world snapped back into focus. The wind sharp and cold, the moon a silent silver witness in the sky. Theron's hands were still tangled in my hair, his body a wall of heat and strength against mine. We stared at each other, the space between us charged with the raw, untamed power we had just shared. The shock in his eyes mirrored my own. This was not part of the training. This was not part of the plan. This was a line crossed, a boundary shattered, and the landscape of our careful alliance was now a wild, unfamiliar territory. He released me as if burned, taking a half step back. The loss of his warmth was a physical blow, leaving me feeling exposed and suddenly cold. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his broad back rigid with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the air. "That," he began, his voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. "That was a tactical necessity, to sever their connection. Nothing more." The words were a lie, and we both knew it. It was a clumsy, desperate attempt to rebuild the walls he had just obliterated. There was nothing tactical about the way my soul had leaped to meet his, nothing strategic about the feeling of rightness, of homecoming that had flooded the broken spaces inside me. My wolf, far from being cowed, was pacing at the forefront of my mind, her head held high, possessive. "Ours," she growled, a low, rumbling assertion that shook me to my core. "Of course," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to contain the tremor in my hands. To acknowledge what had just happened, to give it a name, would be to invite a cataclysm. He was a king, I was his weapon. That was the order of things. He turned back to face me, his composure regained, the impassive mask of the monarch slipping back into place. But his eyes, those brilliant silver eyes, could not lie. They burned with a new tumultuous light. "The Umbra now know that you are shielded," he said, his tone all business once more. "They will not be able to assault your mind so easily, but they will redouble their efforts to find a physical way into this world. The moontide peaks in 3 nights. We have little time." He led me from the rooftop, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. The easy rhythm of teacher and student was gone, replaced by a hyper-awareness of each other. I could feel the heat of his body as he walked ahead of me down the narrow stone stairs, smell the unique scent of him, ozone and winter pine, with a clarity that was almost painful. The bond we had forged, that desperate, powerful connection, thrummed between us, a living, breathing thing. The next 2 days were a fever dream of relentless preparation. Theron pushed me harder than ever before. We sparred until my body screamed with exhaustion, until instinct took over and my movements were as fluid and deadly as his own. He no longer held back as much, meeting my strikes with a force that left bruises blooming on my skin, his own body a testament to the fact that I was finally learning to land blows of my own. The physical contact was a constant, agonizing reminder of that moment on the rooftop. Every time his hands gripped my waist to throw me, every time our bodies collided in a clash of strength, the memory of his lips on mine would flash behind my eyes, sending a jolt of illicit energy through me. He felt it too. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the way his silver eyes would darken for a split second before his control slammed back down. We were 2 poles of a magnet, forced together by circumstance, fighting a pull that was becoming stronger and more dangerous with every passing hour. On the eve of the final night of the moontide, Theron led me deep into the heart of the mountain the spire was built on. We descended down a winding staircase that seemed to go on for miles, the air growing warmer, thick with the smell of sulfur and ancient magic. The stone walls began to glow with faint pulsing veins of what looked like liquid moonlight. We emerged into a vast cavern. In the center was a deep circular pool of water, so black and still, it looked like a pane of obsidian. The glowing veins in the rock all converged here, their ethereal light reflected on the pool's surface. This place hummed with power, a raw elemental energy that made my teeth ache. "This is the heart of the mountain," Theron said, his voice echoing in the immense space. "One of the last places on Earth where the veil between worlds is naturally thin, yet fortified by the mountain's own magic. It is a place of prophecy, of scrying. The seers of your bloodline used pools like this to watch the threads of fate. Tonight, the Umbra will try to use it as a door." My blood ran cold. "They're coming here?" "They will try," he corrected, his hand resting on the hilt of the large, unadorned sword strapped to his back, a weapon I had never seen him carry before. They cannot breach the spire's wards above, not with its ancient magic. But here, the moontide will amplify the pool's power. They will pour all their energy into tearing a hole through it. He looked at me, his expression grave. They will use you as the key. Your Kaelwyn blood is the frequency they need to unlock the door from their side. They will call to you, lure you, try to possess you to force the way open. And what is our plan? I asked, my voice tight. I will guard the gate, he said simply, his gaze fixed on the placid water. And you will be the bait. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced my gut, but I pushed it down, nodding once. This was what he had trained me for. To be the weapon, to stand and fight. We didn't have to wait long. As the moon reached its zenith in the sky far above us, the water in the pool began to stir. The faint light from the glowing stones dimmed, as if being consumed. A profound cold emanated from the pool, leaching the warmth from the cavern. The whispers started again, not just in my head this time, but seeming to come from the water itself. A chorus of sibilant, tempting voices. Come to us, little seer. Your king uses you. He keeps you as a pet, a tool. We can give you true power. We can make you a queen. Do not listen, Lysandra. Theron's voice was a low growl beside me, a solid anchor in the rising tide of darkness. Focus on my voice, on my presence. The surface of the pool began to writhe. A black, oily smoke coiled up from its depths, coalescing into grasping, shadowy tendrils. They reached out, stretching toward me, their form indistinct, but their intent utterly malevolent. I could feel their hunger, a desperate, soul-deep craving that wanted to consume my light, my life force. My training took over. I drew my wolf forward, letting her power flood me. My eyes began to glow gold. My claws slid from my fingertips. I stood my ground, planting my feet on the stone floor, and met the shadow's gaze without flinching. She is stronger than you thought, I snarled, my voice a duet of my own and my wolf's. The whispers in my head turned to shrieks of rage. The smoky tendrils lashed out, striking at an invisible barrier that shimmered in the air a few feet from the pool's edge. Theron stood beside me, his hand outstretched, his own immense power forming a shield of pure will. Your wards cannot hold forever, King of Wolves. The voices hissed as one. The tide is ours. The girl's blood will open the way. A larger shadow began to form in the center of the pool, a being of greater substance and power. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but its limbs were too long, its head featureless save for two burning embers of red light. The pressure in the cavern intensified, the air growing thick and hard to breathe. Theron drew his sword. The blade was forged of a pale, silvery metal that seemed to drink the ambient light, glowing with its own soft luminescence. Stand behind me, he commanded. The main Umbra creature let out a psychic scream that vibrated in my bones and slammed against his shield. Cracks of golden light spiderwebbed across the invisible barrier. It was failing. Lysandra, Theron grunted, his feet sliding back an inch on the stone from the sheer force of the assault. They are focused on you. You have to sever their connection to this place. Use what I taught you. See the threads. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the terrifying sight and the deafening psychic noise. I reached out with my senses, not my physical ones, but the deeper sense my wolf possessed, the one Theron had painstakingly taught me to hone. I pushed past the fear, past the chaos, and looked for the source of their power. And then I saw it. It wasn't a physical thing, but a web of faint, pulsating black lines, like rotten spider silk, stretching from the umbra in the pool. They were anchored to my oldest wounds, to the shame of being an Omega, the terror of Ronan's cruelty, the loneliness of my exile. The umbra were feeding on my pain, using it as a conduit. To sever the threads, I had to let the pain go. All of it. I took a deep breath, and on the exhale, I let it out. I forgave my pack for their blindness. I released my hatred for Ronan, reducing him to a sad, pathetic memory. I embraced the strength I had found in my solitude. I accepted everything I was, not as a collection of scars, but as a warrior forged in fire. As each thread of pain dissolved, a corresponding line of dark energy snapped. The umbra in the pool shrieked, its form wavering. With a final shattering roar, the shield Theron had erected exploded. He was thrown back, landing hard on the stone floor. The shadow creature surged from the pool, its form solidifying, its red eyes locking onto me with pure, unadulterated hatred. It was impossibly fast. It lunged for me, its clawed hand outstretched. I had no time to react, no time to even scream. But Theron was faster. A black-furred hurricane of motion intercepted the creature. He had shifted. In his place stood a wolf of impossible size, larger than any I had ever seen. His fur the color of a moonless night, his eyes blazing with the same silver fire of his human form. He was magnificent, terrifying, a king in every fiber of his being. He slammed into the umbra, and the two beings crashed to the cavern floor, a whirlwind of shadow and fury. The creature's claws tore through Theron's fur, drawing blood, but his powerful jaws locked onto its shoulder, eliciting a soundless scream of agony. Even in his mighty wolf form, the umbra was his equal. It drove him back, its shadowy power seeming to sap his strength. I could feel his life force draining, and a terror unlike any I had ever known seized me. I would not let him die for me. With a scream of my own, I launched myself into the fray, my claws aiming for the creature's back. I was a gnat attacking a lion, but my attack served its purpose. It distracted the umbra for a single, crucial second. It was the second Theron needed. With a mighty heave, he threw the creature off him and lunged for its throat. But the umbra was already dissolving, its form turning to smoke. Retreating back toward the pool, it was escaping. No! The word was a roar from Theron's wolf throat. He would not be fast enough. But I was closer. I threw myself between the retreating shadow and the pool, a desperate, suicidal act to block its path. The umbra solidified for a moment, its red eyes burning with surprise and fury, and swiped at me with its claws. Pain, white-hot and absolute, exploded in my side. I was thrown across the cavern, my head cracking against the stone wall. My vision swam, darkening at the edges. Through the haze of pain, I saw Theron's wolf form leap over me, his jaws finally closing around the umbra's insubstantial neck. There was a terrible, silent implosion of light and shadow, and then the creature was gone. Silence descended. The pool became still and black once more. The glowing veins in the rock brightened, their soft light filling the cavern. I lay in a spreading pool of my own blood, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Theron shifted back, his human form naked and splattered with his own blood and black ichor. He rushed to my side, his face a mask of anguish. "Lysandra!" He gathered me into his arms, his hand pressing against the grievous wound in my side. It was no use. The umbra's claws were poisoned with shadow magic. The wound was not closing. I was dying. You saved me," I whispered, my vision fading. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice breaking. "That is an order. Stay with me." Tears, startling and bright, tracked paths through the grime on his face. He bent his head, pressing his forehead to mine. "I will not lose you," he gruffed, a sound of pure, desperate agony. He looked at the wound, then at my face, a terrible conflict raging in his eyes. He knew there was only one way, a way he had denied himself for centuries, a way that would bind us forever, for better or for worse. "Forgive me," he whispered. Then he lowered his head to my shoulder, to the place where a mate's mark should be, and his fangs, sharp and blessedly final, sank into my flesh. A bond of silver fire, a king's claim, exploded through me, and my world dissolved into blinding, white-hot light. The pain was not gone. It was devoured, consumed in a tidal wave of silver fire that erupted from Theron's bite. It was not the searing, possessive heat of Ronan's corrupted bond, but something far more ancient and absolute. A river of liquid starlight poured into my veins, cauterizing the shadow poison, knitting torn flesh and fractured bone back together. It was a violent, beautiful genesis, the remaking of my very soul. I felt his life force, his immense power, his centuries of loneliness and burden, flooding the hollow spaces within me. The empty void left by my broken bond was not just filled, it was obliterated, reforged into a fortress of adamant and moonlight. My wolf, who had been fading with my life, rose up with a triumphant howl that echoed in the core of my being, recognizing the call of her true alpha, her eternal mate. And then there was only a profound, peaceful dark. When I awoke, it was to the soft scratch of wool against my skin and the crackle of a familiar fire. I was in Theron's chambers in his massive bed, the black furs piled high around me. The gray dawn light filtered through the stone lattice of the window. For a moment I thought I had dreamt it all, the cavern, the umbra, the searing agony of the wound. But when I moved, a dull ache in my side reminded me it was real. I pushed the furs aside and looked down. Where a fatal, poisoned gash had been, there was now only a faint silvery tracery of scars like lightning captured beneath the skin. My gaze moved to my shoulder. There, stark and perfect against my skin, was the king's mark. It was not a brutal brand of ownership, but an intricate, beautiful sigil that seemed to pulse with a soft, internal light. The bond thrummed between us now, a constant, silent song of strength, presence, and a deep, soul-shattering connection. I could feel him, even with my eyes closed. I knew he was in the room. I looked up. Theron sat in a heavy wooden chair by the fire, watching me. He was dressed in simple black trousers, his chest bare, revealing a tapestry of old scars and the fresh, deep gouges the umbra had left behind. They were already healing, but slowly. For the first time, I saw the weariness in him, the immense toll his long, lonely war had taken. The impassive mask of the king was gone. In its place was a raw, aching vulnerability that was more shocking than his power. His silver eyes held a universe of fear, relief, and a dawning wonder that he seemed unable to contain. "Lysandra," he breathed, my name a prayer on his lips. He crossed the room in 2 strides and sat on the edge of the bed, his hand hovering over my arm, as if he was afraid to touch me, afraid I might break. "You're whole," he murmured, his gaze tracing the new, faint scars on my side. I reached up, my fingers trembling slightly, and touched the claiming mark on my shoulder. It was warm to the touch. "You saved me." No, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. He finally dared to touch me, his calloused fingers gently cupping my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, and the simple contact sent a wave of warmth and rightness through the bond. A quiet affirmation of what we now were. "You saved me," from a silence far deeper than any cavern. In that moment, looking into his eyes, I understood. His claiming of me had not just been an act to save my life. It was an act of surrender. The lonely king had finally, after centuries of solitary duty, allowed his heart to choose. He had chosen me. Winter draped the black spire in a mantle of white, its silence no longer oppressive, but peaceful. The moontide had receded, the thinning veil between worlds restored to its natural strength. The umbra were banished for now, their desperate assault thwarted. The whispers in the territories changed. They no longer spoke of Lysandra the murderer, the cursed Omega who fled her bond. Now they spoke in awed tones of the king's Luna, the Shadow Slayer, the lost seer of the Kelwyn line, who had stood with the Alpha of Alphas against the encroaching dark. My past was not erased, but it had been rewritten, the story of shame transformed into a legend of strength. I stood on the windswept peak of the spire, the place where our bond had first been forged in desperation and a stolen kiss. The cold wind whipped strands of my hair across my face, but I barely felt it. A heavy cloak, lined with the black fur of a shadow cat, and clasped at the throat with the king's silver sigil, kept me warm. A familiar presence came to stand behind me, his body a shield against the wind. Theron's arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me back against the solid warmth of his chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his breath a warm cloud in the frigid air. We stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the sun set over his snow-covered kingdom, our kingdom. The bond between us was a constant, steady warmth, as natural and essential as breathing. "What are you thinking of?" he murmured into my ear, his deep voice a familiar vibration against my bones. "The clearing," I answered softly. I was remembering what it felt like, kneeling in the dirt, waiting for death. I turned my head, my cheek brushing against the rough texture of his jaw. I thought any cage was better than the one Ronan planned for me. I never imagined one could feel like freedom. He tightened his arms around me. "This is not a cage, Lysandra. It is a fortress, and you are not its prisoner. You are its heart." He pressed a slow, lingering kiss to my temple. The harsh, demanding king I had first met was still there, his power a constant, thrilling presence. But with me, in these quiet moments, he was simply Theron, my mate, my partner. "The Umbra are not gone forever," I said, the thought a somber undercurrent to our peace. My seer sense, now awakened and honed, could sometimes feel them, a faint, hateful pressure at the edge of the world, waiting, watching. "No, they are not," he agreed, his tone serious. "But they no longer face a solitary king. They face a king and his queen. They face the fire of your wolf and the sight of your ancestors. Let them wait. We will be ready." I leaned back into his embrace, a sense of profound peace settling over me. My journey had begun in blood and shame, in the terrified flight of a broken girl. It had led me down a path of fear and violence, to the very edge of death. But it had also led me here, to the top of the world, into the arms of a love so powerful it had rewritten destiny itself. I was no longer the murderer, the outcast, the weapon. I was Lysandra Veyrath, Luna of the Black Spire, and the silence that had once defined my life was now filled with the steady, resounding heartbeat of my king, our king. We stood together, watching the stars begin to prick the darkening sky, two halves of a whole, guardians of the light, ready for whatever shadows dared to come.